Well, the honest truth, Grenada is a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. And also, as you know, before that meeting here of the convention meeting was preceded by the sixth meeting of the members of the party, which represent the protocol of Cartagena Protocol and biosafety. So that meeting started on the 1st to the 5th, and I was also involved in that meeting. Well, you asked the question what brought me here. Well, given the fact that Grenada is a party to the convention, we normally participate in all meetings. And it is my first meeting of the COP. And I must say Grenada has enormous expectation as far as the proceedings is concerned and the potential results, because we like to see a lot of things, because as you may well be aware, Grenada is a small island developing state with very fragile ecosystems. And therefore, the whole issue of living modified organism and transgenic crops and things, if these are introduced into Grenada, there's a likelihood that we could have enormous negative impact on our ecosystems. And therefore, in coming here, Grenada took the position that many of the small island states have taken, in that we would like to see take a sort of what we call a precautionary approach in terms of the whole question of LMOs, that's living modified organism, and that we support also the whole issue of liability and redress. That means to say, if a company is wanting to export those LMOs into Grenada, we have to ensure that the proper procedure are taken, and that we ensure that we know what it is and the potential impact. So we, from Grenada perspective, we know, and as far as the Cartagena Protocol and biological diversity is concerned, biological diversity is indeed very, very important, because Grenada, some people refer to Grenada as a big garden. We have such rich diversity, and we have to protect these, both, I'm talking about biological diversity, both marine and terrestrial, because the fishing subsector is extremely important to us. In fact, we have taken measures to implement some marine protected areas, because contrary to the pervasive misconception that our marine resources are infinite, that is not the case. In fact, we have evidence that show that in many parts of the world, including Canada, there is a part in Canada, I think in Newfoundland, where the codfish used to be such a big industry, and it has been exhausted there. And they have, and we know that if you don't put proper measures in place, you could lose it out. And so a lot of the issues being discussed at the meeting, Grenada could identify with it, in terms of the impact of climate change and livelihoods and biodiversity, marine protected areas. These are very, very important to us, and that's why we have to be present here to support all the people who are putting forward those proposals and so forth. Yeah.
Aside from the modified or living modified organisms issues that you talked about, there is something about a prevalent major biodiversity issue that is impacting the people of Grenada, right? Till the present times.
Well, one of the things, that is impacting Grenada in a very negative way at this time is the whole issue of the pervasiveness of invasive alien species. Let me give you an example, and this is one of the topics that is being discussed, that will be discussed here, I think, tomorrow in the working groups and so forth. Agriculture is a very, very important subsector to the economy of Grenada, and we see biodiversity is impacted in a very, very negative way by the pervasiveness of invasive species. As the country evolves and the country evolves in terms of development, you find there is such a intense trade between Grenada and other islands, neighboring islands like Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries that we do a lot of trade in. And there's always the potential that you'll find a lot of invasive species coming on board. When we say invasive species, we're not talking about, we're talking about like insect species we never had, like diseases. It could be whether it's fungal or bacterial diseases. Let me give you a classical example. In 1996 thereabout, there was an invasive species called pink mealybug that was first observed in Grenada. and which created such devastation that at one stage we are really, really concerned that our agriculture would be no more. There's a group of plants called malvaceous plants, which include things like sorrel and okra and so forth, that was very, very, very affected. And in fact, we had to put special program in place because when you have invasive species invasion, you could allow resources for management, for eradication, and so forth. And subsequent to that, we have a lot of areas in our biodiversity that have been affected. For example, Grenada used to be a major producer and exporter of bananas. And in 2005, we had a disease called black sikatoka, which we first observed and which created havoc for bananas, for plantain, and so forth. We have also recent effect on a lot of our palm diversity. There's a insect pest called the red palm mite, which continue to affect not only Grenada but the whole sub-region, the Windward Islands, which include islands like St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica, and the red palm mite is in all over the Caribbean. Because as you know, the palm and all the family associated palm, whether it's coconut or ornamental palms, are a rich biodiversity in the Caribbean. And we are seeing now that they are immensely affected by the red palm mite. And then we have other, for example, in mangoes. You know, mangoes is a very, very common, we have hundreds of species, varieties of mango in Grenada. And we have a disease called mango seed weevil that have continued to affect. We have other fruit flies that affect. So essentially, this is one aspect that where our biodiversity has been enormously affected. The issue of climate change has the potential to continue affecting our biodiversity. There is clearly every reason to believe that climate change is an area that we have to, and that is an area again that has been discussed here enormously, because what we see now more than ever before is some erratic behavior of our climatic pattern. For example, our dry season normally goes from January to May. But like this year, we had no dry season, so the rain just kept falling. And right now, we should be in the rainy season, and we're seeing very, very dry condition. In fact, 2 years ago, we had a serious, serious drought where a major part of our biodiversity was enormously affected. You're talking about a lot of people lose nutmeg trees. You know, Grenada is known as the island of spice. Yeah. So nutmeg, in fact, prior to the passage of Hurricane Ivan in 2004, Grenada was the second largest producer and exporter of nutmegs in the world. So during that very bad drought we had about 2 years ago, we lose a lot of our biodiversity, nutmegs, trees, and others, because what we found, as we are affected by climate change, what we are observing more and more is the fact that a lot of trees, which we thought had good resistance to harsh weather conditions, we realize they are exactly, because look at the Hurricane Ivan. When we thought a nutmeg tree could have stood up to high wind velocity, that was not the case. They just... So really and truly, our biodiversity has been very, very seriously handicapped. And again, the whole issue of, if you look at the biodiversity at the marine level, we're seeing, as we have an accelerated activity on land, in terms of people might dump certain things, and pollution, all these things are affecting the marine biodiversity significantly. And that's precisely why Grenada has begun implementing marine protected areas and trying to raise the level of awareness and consciousness on the part of our population that they need to take much more responsibility in terms of what they do, so to avoid polluting the sea and so forth. Because what happens on the land essentially affects what happens in the marine environment. Because when we have, you know, all the rivers and other water bodies, you know, they ended up in the sea in the final analysis. So let us say if you have a lot of indiscriminate use of pesticide, for example, on the land as an agricultural activity, there's a likelihood that it will end up in the sea. And that has enormous negative impact on the marine environment, marine ecosystem.
I think the the vulnerability quotient is very high.
Yeah.
And this is one of the interviews where I can actually hear the interviewee speak about the direct damages on direct negative impacts on the people
Yeah.
and the economy of the country.
Oh, definitely, because
And
there's for example, the livelihood, the economy, and even the culture of our people is intrinsically intertwined with our biodiversity. For example, tourism is one of the leading industries in Grenada. It's a major source of livelihood for a lot of our people. When tourists visit the island, they could enjoy the diving, because they dive to see all the vast number of fish and so forth, fishes. But if you have serious damage to the marine environment, the marine ecosystem, what essentially we do, the tourists and them would have nothing to see. Fisheries is important for us for food security. Our people depend heavily on the fish resources for the dietary, intake and so forth. And if we do not have sufficient fish, it would impact livelihood. Grenada has a substantial amount of fishermen and all the dependents. Now, if when they go out, there is no more fish to what do they do? And again, fisheries, we export fish to the United States, to the European Union. And again, it's a source of foreign exchange generation for our country. And again, agriculture. If our biodiversity is depleted, then a lot of tourists who come to see the beautiful flora of Grenada would not be able to see it. And we would not have all the nutmegs, the spices, the bananas, so we could feed ourselves. And, so it's very important. We have to make the link between biodiversity and livelihood.
Absolutely, and I really hope that all these micro issues are extensively discussed and considered in COP11. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why you see people come from all over the world to be here, because they realize, they identify, and they see we have to change all the negative things that had happened and impacted on the diversity in a negative way. So we're looking for solution, and we're looking for consensus in terms of moving forward.